He knew the feeling. The tightening in the chest, the subtle clenching of the jaw, the almost imperceptible rise in blood pressure. It was the prelude to frustration, the overture to anger, the unmistakable sign that the world, once again, was not cooperating. You know exactly what I'm talking about. It was that moment when the carefully constructed plans, the meticulously laid strategies, the perfectly envisioned outcomes, crumbled into dust before the relentless onslaught of reality. He saw it in the canceled flight, stranding him hours from a critical meeting. He felt it in the condescending tone of a colleague, undermining his expertise in front of the entire team. He tasted it in the bitter sting of a perceived betrayal, a broken promise that shattered his trust. It was the daily grind of unmet expectations, the constant barrage of unforeseen obstacles, the relentless reminder that control was an illusion, a comforting lie whispered in the ear of the ambitious. He had chased control his entire life. From meticulously organizing his schedule to micromanaging every aspect of his projects, he believed that order and precision were the keys to success. He envisioned himself as the architect of his own destiny, carefully constructing a life free from chaos and uncertainty. He saw the world as a machine, and he, the skilled operator, could manipulate its levers to achieve his desired outcome. But the machine was broken, or perhaps it was never a machine at all. The illusion persisted, fueled by the accolades and achievements that momentarily validated his efforts. Each successful project, each hard-won victory, reinforced the belief that control was within his grasp. He became addicted to the feeling of mastery, the fleeting sense of dominance over his environment. But the victories were always temporary, the control always tenuous. The universe, it seemed, delighted in reminding him of his limitations. He felt the weight of expectation, the crushing pressure to perform, to succeed, to maintain the illusion of control. He internalized the criticism, amplified the failures, and allowed the external world to dictate his internal state. He became a prisoner of his own ambition, chained to the relentless pursuit of an unattainable ideal. He was a ship captain obsessed with charting a perfect course, blind to the storm raging around him. The irony was not lost on him. The more he struggled to control, the more out of control he felt. The tighter he gripped, the more slipped through his fingers. The harder he fought, the more exhausted he became. He was trapped in a vicious cycle, a self-inflicted wound that festered with each passing day. He was so focused on manipulating the external world that he had completely neglected the internal one. He recognized the pattern, the predictable sequence of events that led to frustration and despair. The initial optimism, the careful planning, the inevitable setback, the escalating anger, the eventual exhaustion. It was a well-worn path, a familiar landscape of disappointment and regret. He knew the route by heart, the potholes and pitfalls, the dead ends and detours. Yet, he continued to walk it, driven by the relentless pursuit of control. He saw the toll it was taking, the strained relationships, the missed opportunities, the simmering resentment. He was sacrificing his well-being on the altar of ambition, trading his peace of mind for the fleeting illusion of control. He was so busy fighting the world that he had forgotten how to live in it. He needed a new strategy, a different approach, a fundamental shift in perspective. The old ways were no longer working. They were, in fact, destroying him. The only question was, could he break free? Could he relinquish the illusion of control and embrace the uncertainty of life? The answer, he would discover, wasn't in some esoteric philosophical treatise, but in the mundane reality of his everyday existence. It wasn't about escaping the chaos, but navigating it with a newfound sense of equanimity. It was about shifting the locus of control from the external to the internal, from the uncontrollable to the perfectly manageable. He began to see his emotions not as enemies to be suppressed, but as messengers to be understood. The anger that flared when a project went sideways, the anxiety that gnawed at him before a presentation, the frustration that bubbled up when faced with incompetence. These were not signs of weakness, but signals indicating a misalignment between his expectations and reality. They were opportunities for introspection, invitations to examine his assumptions and adjust his perspective. Consider how this applies when you find yourself stuck in traffic. The instinctive reaction is frustration, a feeling of powerlessness as you watch precious minutes tick away. You might honk your horn, curse the other drivers, or desperately search for an alternative route, all in a futile attempt to regain control. But the traffic remains, indifferent to your agitation. The Stoic approach, conversely, acknowledges the situation without judgment. The delay is simply a fact, an unavoidable circumstance. Instead of resisting it, you can choose to accept it, using the time to listen to an audiobook, practice mindfulness, or simply enjoy the quiet stillness. The traffic hasn't changed, but your experience of it has been transformed. A crucial layer involves recognizing the inherent imperfection of others. The colleague who habitually interrupts, the boss who constantly micromanages, the client who makes unreasonable demands. These are not personal affronts, but reflections of their own internal struggles. Their behavior may be irritating, even detrimental, but it is ultimately beyond your control. You cannot change them, but you can change how you respond to them. You can choose to practice empathy, recognizing their flaws without condoning their actions. You can set boundaries, protecting your time and energy without resorting to anger or resentment. You can even use their behavior as an opportunity for growth, developing your patience, your communication skills, and your ability to remain calm under pressure. Building on this, however, it is important to distinguish between acceptance and resignation. Acceptance is not passive surrender, but active engagement with reality. It is not about giving up on your goals, but about pursuing them with a clear understanding of the obstacles that lie in your path. It is about focusing your energy on what you can control, your thoughts, your actions, your attitude, and letting go of what you cannot. Resignation, on the other hand, is a feeling of hopelessness, a belief that change is impossible. It is a passive acceptance of the status quo, a surrender to the forces of circumstance. The Stoic seeks acceptance, not resignation. He acknowledges the challenges, but remains committed to his values and his goals. He understands that true strength lies not in avoiding adversity, but in overcoming it with grace and resilience. He considered the insidious nature of expectation, not just the expectations imposed by others, but the self-imposed standards that often proved far more demanding. The relentless pursuit of perfection, the unwavering belief in his own infallibility, these were the chains that bound him to a cycle of disappointment. He needed to redefine success, to measure it not by the attainment of external goals, but by the cultivation of internal virtues. To clarify, think about the last time you meticulously planned a vacation. You envisioned perfect weather, seamless travel, and unforgettable experiences. Then, reality struck. Delayed flights, crowded beaches, unexpected expenses. The vacation you had so carefully crafted fell short of your expectations. The instinctive reaction might be frustration, a feeling of being cheated out of your well-deserved break. Yet, what if you shifted your focus? What if you embraced the unexpected detours, the unplanned moments of serendipity? What if you allowed yourself to be present in the moment, appreciating the simple pleasures that often get overlooked in the pursuit of perfection? The vacation might not be what you envisioned, but it could still be a valuable experience, a chance to learn, to grow, and to connect with yourself and others in new ways. Delving deeper, it's important to scrutinize the narratives we tell ourselves. We often create stories about our lives, narratives that shape our perceptions and influence our actions. These stories can be empowering or limiting, depending on the beliefs they reinforce. If you constantly tell yourself that you're not good enough, that you're destined to fail, or that you're a victim of circumstance, you're likely to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. On the other hand, if you choose to focus on your strengths, your accomplishments, and your potential for growth, you're more likely to achieve your goals and live a fulfilling life. The key is to become aware of the stories you're telling yourself and to consciously choose narratives that support your well-being. In a similar vein, he began to appreciate the power of detachment. Not emotional detachment, which would be cold and unfeeling, but detachment from outcomes. He realized that he could pour his heart and soul into a project, give it his absolute best effort, without being emotionally attached to the results. He could strive for excellence without demanding perfection. He could embrace ambition without succumbing to greed. He could pursue success without sacrificing his integrity. This detachment allowed him to approach his work with a sense of freedom and creativity, unburdened by the fear of failure. Contrasting this is the idea of living in accordance with nature. For instance, consider a mighty oak tree buffeted by a storm. It doesn't resist the wind with rigid defiance, which would only lead to its breaking. Instead, it bends and sways, yielding to the force of nature while remaining firmly rooted in the ground. Similarly, the individual can learn to adapt to the inevitable challenges of life, accepting what cannot be changed while remaining grounded in their values and principles. The goal isn't to eliminate adversity, but to navigate it with wisdom and resilience, drawing strength from the inherent harmony of the natural world. He began to recognize the subtle tyranny of language itself. The words he used to describe his experiences, the labels he assigned to his emotions, often reinforced the very patterns he was trying to break. By characterizing a setback as a failure, for instance, he amplified the negative impact and perpetuated a cycle of self-doubt. Conversely, by reframing it as a learning opportunity, he shifted his perspective and opened himself up to growth. The power of language, he realized, lay not in its ability to accurately reflect reality, but in its capacity to shape it. Consider, now, how this applies when you encounter criticism. The instinctive reaction might be defensiveness, a desire to justify your actions and refute the accusations. You might become entangled in arguments, attempting to prove your point and win the approval of others. Yet, what if you approached criticism with a spirit of inquiry? A further crucial aspect centers on the practice of mindfulness, not merely as a trendy buzzword, but as a disciplined technique for cultivating awareness of the present moment. He discovered that by focusing his attention on his breath, his senses, his thoughts, he could interrupt the automatic patterns of reaction that often led to frustration and anger. He could observe his emotions without judgment, acknowledge their presence without being swept away by their intensity. Mindfulness, he realized, was not about suppressing his feelings, but about creating space between stimulus and response, allowing him to choose his actions with greater intention and clarity. To illustrate, imagine you were caught in a downpour without an umbrella. Your initial response might be annoyance, a feeling of inconvenience and discomfort. You might rush to find shelter, cursing the weather and wishing you had been more prepared. However, with mindfulness, you can choose to experience the rain without resistance. You can feel the cool droplets on your skin, hear the rhythmic sound of the rain falling on the pavement, smell the fresh scent of the wet earth. You can allow yourself to be fully present in the moment, appreciating the sensory experience without judgment or complaint. The rain hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has been transformed. Moreover, he began to explore the concept of impermanence. The understanding that everything in life is constantly changing, that nothing remains the same. This realization brought him a profound sense of freedom, a release from the illusion of permanence that had fueled so much of his anxiety. He understood that his successes were fleeting, his failures temporary, his relationships evolving. By accepting the impermanent nature of reality, he could let go of his attachment to outcomes and embrace the present moment with greater joy and appreciation. In contrast, think about the experience of losing a cherished object. Your initial reaction might be grief, a feeling of sadness and loss. You might cling to memories of the object, wishing you could have it back. However, by accepting the impermanent nature of all things, you can begin to process your grief and move forward. You can acknowledge the object's significance in your life, while recognizing that its absence does not diminish your worth or your happiness. You can cherish the memories without being consumed by the loss. The object is gone, but your life continues, enriched by the experiences you shared with it. Reflecting on this journey so far, one begins to perceive a profound shift, a recalibration of the inner compass. It's akin to a mariner, initially battling the tempestuous sea with brute force, finally understanding the currents and tides, learning to navigate them with grace and skill. The initial impulse to dominate, to control every variable, gradually yields to a more nuanced understanding of influence and adaptation. The pursuit of external mastery, once the driving force, now recedes, revealing the far greater potential of internal sovereignty. It is not about bending the world to one's will, but about cultivating an inner resilience that allows one to withstand the inevitable storms. The relentless pursuit of achievement, viewed through this lens, transforms from a source of anxiety into an opportunity for growth, a chance to test and refine one's inner fortitude. Drawing these threads together, we see a framework emerging, not of rigid control, but of fluid responsiveness. The focus shifts from the unyielding grip to the open hand, ready to receive what life offers, both the pleasant and the challenging. It's the difference between a dam, stubbornly resisting the flow of water, and a riverbed, channeling its power productively. In light of these insights, the path forward becomes clearer. It is a path of conscious choice, of deliberate action guided by inner values rather than external pressures. It is a path of self-awareness, of recognizing and managing one's emotional responses with wisdom and compassion. It is a path of acceptance, of embracing the inherent uncertainty of life with equanimity and grace. As we pivot towards the final reflection, consider the cumulative effect of these subtle shifts in perspective. It is not about achieving some unattainable state of perfection, but about cultivating a continuous process of self-improvement. It is about learning to dance with life, embracing its rhythms and its unpredictability, finding joy and meaning in the midst of the chaos. The power, it turns out, resides not in controlling the dance, but in mastering one's own steps. The journey is far from over, of course. Indeed, it is a lifelong pursuit, a continuous unfolding of potential. However, with these guiding principles in place, the individual is equipped to navigate the challenges that lie ahead with greater confidence and resilience. The destination is not a fixed point, but a direction, a continuous striving towards inner peace and self-mastery. The final takeaway, then, is not a conclusion, but a beginning, an invitation to embrace the Stoic path with renewed purpose and determination. He understood now that the pursuit of control was a siren song, a deceptive melody that lured him towards the jagged rocks of frustration and despair. The real power, the true mastery, lay not in dictating the terms of reality, but in shaping his response to them. It wasn't about building walls to keep the world at bay, but about cultivating an inner garden where peace and resilience could flourish, regardless of the external climate. The journey had been a gradual stripping away of illusions, a painful but necessary shedding of the skin of expectation. What remained was not a hardened shell of indifference, but a supple strength, a quiet confidence born of self-awareness. The world, in its chaotic beauty, would continue to unfold as it always had, indifferent to his desires, impervious to his plans. The storms would still rage, the winds would still howl, the unexpected would still arrive, unannounced and uninvited. But he would no longer be tossed about like a rudderless ship, at the mercy of the waves. He would become the anchor, the steady point in the midst of the tempest, drawing strength from the depths of his own being. This wasn't about resignation, about passively accepting whatever fate might deal. It was about active engagement, about choosing his battles wisely, about focusing his energy on what truly mattered. It was about recognizing the difference between influence and control, between shaping his own actions and attempting to manipulate the actions of others. It was about cultivating a sense of inner freedom, a liberation from the tyranny of expectation. He realized that the true measure of a man wasn't his ability to command the world, but his capacity to navigate it with grace and integrity. It wasn't about avoiding suffering, but about finding meaning in the midst of it. It wasn't about achieving perfection, but about striving for excellence, knowing that the journey itself was the reward. The Stoic path wasn't a destination, but a way of being, a continuous practice of self-awareness and self-mastery. And so he stepped forward, not with a sense of invincibility, but with a quiet determination. He embraced the uncertainty, the ambiguity, the inherent imperfections of life. He relinquished the illusion of control, and in its place, he discovered a far greater power, the power to choose his own response, to shape his own destiny, to find peace in the midst of the storm. The true practice begins now, not as a grand declaration, but as a quiet commitment, a daily act of choosing inner calm over outward chaos, a continuous journey towards a more resilient, more meaningful existence.